What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WrestleRant. Graham, G.S. and Matthews here, back with another book review. And today we're going to be talking about Macho Man, the Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Actually, our third book review here on the channel in a number of weeks. We did the Jim Ross book review from a few weeks ago, his latest book. We talked about the NWO book a couple of weeks ago as well. Today we're talking the latest audiobook I checked out, courtesy of John Finkel, who wrote the book. Randy Cruz and I actually talked to John about the book about a year ago when he released it. It's a relatively recent book. It only came out in April of 2024. So it has all the up-to-date information on Randy Savage. This is the complete lowdown on everything Macho Man. So if you grew up a fan of the Macho Man, or if you're just willing to learn more about him and his life, his in-ring career, and everything kind of else in between, this is the book for you. I think it clocks in, the audiobook clocked in at over 9 hours, and I thought this would take me a lot longer than it did to check out in its entirety. It only took me about a week because I was honestly so engrossed in it and so invested in what John was writing. And like I said, I checked out the audiobook version of it. I finished it a lot quicker than I thought I would. I think the book is around 320 something pages. It's three something. The audiobook is over 9 hours, and it's not by John himself. But I got to give props. The person who did the audiobook on Audible, that's where I listened to it, honestly did an amazing job. They did a fantastic job. And it's not supposed to be like an autobiography, like in Randy Savage's voice or anything like that. But he's got the impersonations down pat. So when he does the voice impersonations of Macho Man and a lot of the other people, like fucking Jimmy Hart, random people that are impersonated throughout the book, whoever reads it does an amazing job of it. So, like I said, I think this is a great in-detail biography of everything Randy Savage, beginning with his family and upbringing. The book actually goes into great detail about his father, mother, how they met, what his dad did growing up, becoming a wrestler as well. His brother Lanny, we hear a lot about Lanny in the book. And John actually said to Randy and I when we talked to the author last year about the book that he spoke to Lanny a lot about, that was really where he got a lot of the information about Randy was from Lanny before Lanny died a few years ago. So his contributions to the book are immeasurable as well. But we learn a lot about his upbringing and kind of how he really had a passion for baseball, did Randy growing up. Not really so much wrestling, which is where his father actually had a history as well. But they go into a lot about the baseball career that he had, going undrafted, and I think he wanted to end up on the Cincinnati Reds. I believe he actually made the team, or he went undrafted, or he was at least in like the minor league team or whatever. The book makes it, very clear as to what the case was with his baseball career early on. But he was good, and he had a major passion for it. He just wasn't good enough to make the team. And it's not as if the book kind of words it in a way where it's like, oh yeah, he was screwed out of making the MLB, or he would have been this breakout baseball player had he actually made it. And he really, he suffered this major injury that prevented him from making it farther than he did. He actually did suffer an injury later on, but that wasn't until a lot later on, well after he went undrafted. They make it abundantly clear from people that John talked to for this book that he just wasn't good enough to make it to that level, which I thought was interesting. He actually also wrestled while he was in the minors. Now, this was before he, I think, made the full-time career decision to break into wrestling and follow in his father's footsteps. But he wanted to, I guess, entertain the idea of becoming a wrestler. So he actually wrestled, which is what he was not supposed to do this, but he did it anyway. He wrestled under a mask as the Spider in local shows and whatever while he was in the minors, which I thought was really interesting. He was actually inspired by the original Sheik in a lot of ways as well. I think his name was Eddie Fairhat, maybe? I forgot his real name, but they did a whole Dark Side of the Ring special on him that I talked about here on the channel a few months back, so check that out for more information on the original Sheik. But it was actually Ole Anderson, which I did not know. This is probably common knowledge, but I actually either knew this and forgot or just completely forgot that it was actually Ole Anderson that came up with the Macho Man nickname, or not the Macho Man nickname, the Savage name rather, kind of describing Randy in the ring as like having these savage characteristics and attributes about him. And that was where the Savage last name came from. It was actually his mom, and I thought it was funny how the book had different versions of where he may have come up with the Macho Man name. Like it may have come from a song. He gives credit to his mother at one point. He credits his mother for coming up with the name. So they kind of settle on the mom coming up with the Macho Man nickname. And the mom saying at one point that came from a song that was popular around that point in the 70s. So they don't actually say distinctly where it came from, like definitely with certainty. But they make a lot of, there's a lot of speak about it being from the mother. So they credit the mother with coming up with the Macho Man nickname, which I thought was interesting. And he also claimed that it came from his baseball career, that people were calling him Macho Man while he was playing baseball. And as John, the author, kind of makes note of during the book, there's no evidence of this. There's no record of him ever being called or being known as Macho Man. So, again, a lot of different versions, which I thought was interesting. But they talk a lot about his feud with Jerry Lawler and the Continental Wrestling Association promotion, CWA. And he also talked to Jimmy Hart around that point about coming to WWF. So it was kind of the conversation with Jimmy that led him to WWF. They go into detail a lot about the Miss Elizabeth relationship outside of the ring and the meeting at a gym. And this was years before he went to WWE. They actually wanted to elope, which was interesting, or at least he wanted to. I'm not sure if she wanted to or if it was really just his decision and she went along with it. I'm not sure, but they got eloped. It was a very small wedding. It was only, I think, maybe her parents and his parents, or maybe just the mothers, or maybe just I forgot who exactly was there, but it was like a very, very small wedding. Lanny wasn't even there. Lanny didn't even make the wedding. He had like another show going on or whatever, and he said that's exactly how Randy would have wanted it. He would not have wanted me to miss a show or miss a booking or whatever for this wedding, which I thought was interesting. And they mentioned in the book that Macho Man actually met with Vince to go to the WWF a mere 6 months right after the wedding, which was interesting as well. He actually asked to work with Steamboat directly going into the WrestleMania 3 match, and obviously that's regarded as one of the best matches in not only his career, but in WrestleMania history over that Intercontinental Championship, and just one of the best Mania matches, period. It was Savage specifically who wanted to work with Steamboat. They didn't have any warm-up matches either. Now, it was commonplace around this point to have, like the typical house show matches, untelevised matches and whatnot, to kind of get ready for the big stage, make sure they got their shit down. They did not have any warm-up matches, and that gave them more time to prepare and kind of put their match together for Mania. And as has been discussed elsewhere over the years, they were very intricate, specifically Savage was, with putting the match together move by move to the point where it was an exhausting process. Is remembered as an instant classic, of course, but the process in putting that match together and preparing for it and really, we're going to do this here, this there, this here, all these different near falls and whatnot, made for an amazing match. But Steamboat has also talked about publicly how it was really just a pain in the ass to put that match together, and it wasn't really as organic as some people may think it was. But anyway, they talk about the Honky Tonk Man taking the title from Steamboat. Steamboat wanted to have a kid. He was kind of prioritizing his family and I think the birth of his child, over the title run in his wrestling career. And Vince was like, yeah, that's totally fine. We're going to take the championship off of you, but that's totally fine. I don't think Steamboat was in WWE for much longer after that before he went back to, or before he went to WCW. But Honky Tonk Man, they tell this story about how he did not want to lose the championship to, at that point, a now babyface Randy Savage. And that was really what kind of kicked off a series of events in the years that followed that led to the Mega Powers, the birth of the Mega Powers, the implosion of the Mega Powers, his championship run. Had Honky Tonk Man dropped the championship to Savage, who knows what would have happened. Obviously, he ended up dropping it to Warrior at the first SummerSlam a year and a half after he won it. And that led to, at that point, the longest reign in the history of the Intercontinental Championship. And thankfully, it has since been broken by Gunther, the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, in my opinion. But yeah, they go into great detail about what went into the Mega Powers formation and how big of a deal it was for people watching at that point, and just the sheer electricity of Hogan and Savage joining forces. And it was weird with Elizabeth, though, because a lot of the stuff that was going on in front of the camera was also happening behind the camera. Savage and Hogan were close. They were friends, but he was also very paranoid about where where Liz was going, who she was hanging out with. It was kind of getting weird with people like George the Animal Steel, who was already married and had a daughter, and he was a lot older than Savage at that point. And Savage didn't even really trust him being alone with Elizabeth, so it was very weird behind the scenes. They also talked about, which I thought was interesting, the angle where Hogan kind of carried Elizabeth out of the ring while Savage was getting beat up. This was right before the Mega Powers broke up. And the fact they never got a tag team title run together is kind of crazy, to be honest with you. But the whole scene where Hogan was carrying Liz out, and that was part of the story, was also a shoot. Like, Savage was really paranoid. Whoa, what part are you holding of Elizabeth? Like, where are your hands? And stuff like that. And he got really pissed at Hogan over that. So what we were seeing on screen at that point was also bleeding over and kind of piling over into real life, which was interesting. They talked about how it was also a shoot, how Savage felt overshadowed as WWE champion. He would be in magazines, but not until like well into the magazine, whereas before the pages that he was on, the spread that he was on, it was all Hogan, who was not the champion at that point in time. Savage won the championship at WrestleMania 4. That was a brief period where Hogan was not champion after being champion for quite a few years at that point. Anyway, so Savage actually shoved Elizabeth at one point in real life. And it was said here that was like the kind of the catalyst to their split in real life, where a lot of stuff was already building. She knew she had to walk away, and that was a few years later. So they did get divorced and split up years later, but that wasn't when it happened. I think that may have happened later on, or if it did happen at that point, they didn't split up until a few years later. But yeah, they get into the divorce and the separation, but that kind of confused me when he talked about that and how when he actually shoved her, when it was like the whole didn't trust her thing going on and whatever. That led to their split, but it wasn't immediate. It was kind of a slow process. But yeah, he actually did end up doing commentary for a Reds game, which was cool considering he didn't make the team, but he was able to kind of go full circle all those years later as a WWE superstar and getting that media mainstream crossover appeal, doing commentary for the Reds, which was sick. They talk about the snake bite with him and Jake Roberts when he got bit for real by Jake's snake, and that was a real angle. Obviously, they devenomized the snake, but he was very skeptical that Jake actually devenomized it. He thought Jake may have left the venom in because he thought of himself as a threat, and he thought that Jake might have left the venom in so he could actually kill Savage. And Jake's like, you are a fucking wild man. Like, absolutely not. You have to trust me. And Jake had to get bitten first by the snake to prove to Savage that it was devenomized. And his arm's blown up, and then Savage, his arm blew up after he got bit, and he had to go to like the ER a couple of days later after it didn't really swell down. He got 104 fever and whatever. It was crazy, but I thought that whole story was cool because that Savage Steamboat or Savage, that too, but Savage Jake Roberts feud was very memorable, a very memorable point in Savage's career. So talking about the importance of that, I thought was cool, and how it did not lead to a Mania match. It sounded like from what Jake said, who was interviewed for the book, or at least they incorporated quotes from Jake for the book, that it was going to go until WrestleMania. That ended up changing. Plans changed, as they always do. It ended up being Savage and Ric Flair for the WWE Championship at that WrestleMania, an angle also involving Liz. But the funny thing is, going into that period from late 91 into early 92, mid 92, they were on the skids. They were just about to break up, and it was really bad at that point. They got separated in 1992. Actually, the day after WrestleMania 8, I think it was either finalized or they went their separate ways. But they detail the incident in Florida where they continued working together through WrestleMania. But in Florida, Liz was just hanging out with the Hogans, Linda Hogan, who was married to Hulk Hogan at that point, and she wasn't picking up her phone. And she did that on purpose because she was kind of trying to get away from Randy, but he flew all the way down there to Florida thinking that she was having an affair and sleeping with Hogan or whatever. Hulk Hogan, that is. And Linda witnessed the whole thing. They were all very close up until that point, and he got into a massive argument with Liz over it, and it led to this whole incident that kind of led to them going their separate ways and getting divorced. So I thought that was interesting, how they kind of detailed that whole incident. And it's been talked about before. I think that whole thing was also discussed in the Dark Side of the Ring on Macho Man and Liz that they did on them probably 5-6 years ago at this point. It wasn't until 1993, actually, though, that they went public with the divorce on screen. And that's probably for a reason, because although they were separated in 92, in storyline, they had just gotten married in late 1991. They were a happily married couple in 1992 on TV. That was what the whole Ric Flair feud was even over. And then they couldn't really go forward. And to a lot of people at that point, when it was still considered real for so many people, they couldn't just say that it was, they were actually getting a divorce in real life. So they held off on that until 1993 when he talked about it in the magazine and whatever. And at that point, they kind of settled in the commentary. They talk about the Warrior match and That was when he had to retire, so to speak, but he didn't actually retire. He got back in the ring soon after. He did commentary, but he wanted to wrestle like full-time for WWE again, and at that point, he wasn't even 40 yet, so he still felt good. He was not the Macho Man of old, but he still had something to contribute. He felt more than just beyond commentary. He actually wanted to finish out his career, the book says, against Shawn Michaels in a hair versus career match at WrestleMania 10, where I think he wanted to lose that match. Now, he had already lost a career match against fucking Warrior a few years earlier, so how much that would have meant, I don't know. But that match in the ring would have been amazing, and Shawn was on the ascent at that point. He had just won the Intercontinental Championship, broken away from Marty Jannetty. So it would have the match would have made a whole lot of sense to do at WrestleMania. I think that would have been WrestleMania 10 because he left in 1994. They didn't go in that direction. Obviously, Shawn had a banger on that show instead with Razor Ramon, assuming it was that Mania where they wanted to do that match. I think Savage was on that show against Crush or like a fucking random other match that he had instead on that show. I don't remember. But still, that was kind of the impetus where when they didn't want to go in that direction for him to face Shawn Michaels, they just were like, all right, we're going to keep you on commentary. And Savage was like, okay, I'm going to leave because my contract is up in late 1994. I want to go wrestle elsewhere. So he went to WCW. Because of his partnership with Slim Jim, the contract basically paid for itself. They talked about that in the NWO book as well. So I thought that was cool. But, obviously he was very synonymous with the Slim Jim brand. They talk about that in the book. He actually took a pay cut, Savage did, to get his brother hired. Now, Savage told Eric, I would love to get my brother Lanny here. He was very loyal to his family. That was very evident even up until the end. And Eric's like, I can't really justify paying this guy to come into the company. And he says, listen, I'll take a pay cut if you bring in my brother. What he did in WCW, I have no idea. I don't remember. I wasn't watching at that point, so I have no idea. But I can't imagine he was there for very long or that he did all that much. But anyway, they talk about how he wanted to put over DDP during their feud, and I'm actually just reading about that now in DDP's book that I'm going to be reviewing next year on the channel, coming up probably in a few weeks. And how DDP was really stoked to be working with Savage, and how Savage really, it meant a lot for them to be working with each other because DDP was very selfless and working with Savage, and he looked up to him, and they were close, and I thought that was really, really cool. But anyway, so he ended up leaving in 2000. That was when he ended up leaving WCW. And then the last couple of chapters here are just a bunch of random things, like the rap album that he did in the early 2000s and how did not sell nearly as many copies as he was hoping. They talk about Bonesaw and how he suffered a neck injury actually in the filming of the movie, and he wasn't really able to turn his body. He had to turn his body to move his neck because he couldn't move just his neck after that. That's how bad the bump was. That would have been in 2001, 2002. But he played that role so well. He was all juiced up on roids and shit. Probably not the best physical period of his career, of course, but he looked awesome and he played that role really, really well. And I think there was a line in there that was also where he said it's playtime is over or whatever. They said that was actually ad-libbed from Savage, which was really cool, and that's obviously a very memorable line in that movie. But they talk about the whole Bonesaw thing and how he really kind of crossed over into the mainstream. But then he kind of fell out of the limelight soon after that. After Spider-Man and the whole rap album, he really wasn't doing much. They don't talk about his TNA run at all. TNA brought him in for, I think, one match, at least only one match, in 2004. He looked like shit. I don't know how much he even really did. I remember watching the match at one point years ago. But yeah, he did wrestle at least one more match in TNA. I don't know if he wrestled again after that, but the book doesn't talk about that at all. Instead, the last chapter or two are kind of focused on him meeting his next wife, Lynn, who he actually had dated originally back in the 70s, but they reconnected, fell in love. They talk about how he made up with Hogan, which I thought was interesting because I thought a lot of that was bullshit, but it came from the mother's account. So, from the mother's perspective, she has also since passed away, but I thought that was interesting that they included that in there because Hogan tends to lie about a lot of stuff about, being back on good terms with certain people and making amends with certain people like Warrior. I believe that because that was kind of caught on camera in 2014. But the Savage one, you could have easily made up. Savage hated Hogan for a very long time. And according to the mom anyway, they did make up. And it was Savage actually that made the first kind of, he kind of extended the first olive branch, so to speak. So the dad died right before their wedding, right before Randy had married Lynn. This would have been in like the mid-2000s, late 2000s. The dad died right before then. He was actually in the process of making up with WWE, they had mentioned, because he was featured in the All-Stars game in a commercial for which they actually filmed at his house. So who knows what that would have led to? Probably a Hall of Fame induction, I want to say, in 2012, 2013. Probably very similar to what they did with Warrior, who died actually days within the induction right afterward. Savage did not have that honor. They didn't put him in the Hall of Fame until 2015, posthumously rather. I'm glad he's in it all, but obviously that induction speech could have been legendary had they made up prior to that point. I put that entirely in WWE. They don't really go into the reason why he never returned to WWE when all the other legends did. And the book only just says there's been rumors and speculation, none of which has ever been confirmed, including the book doesn't mention this by name, but the whole Stephanie McMahon rumor that Savage was sleeping with her or was interested in Stephanie McMahon or whatever. That's never even brought up in the book. I'm not even saying if it's true or not true, but that was a big reason that was speculated for a long time that Vince never brought Savage back. Now, maybe he's a big loyalty person. So because Savage jumped ship, maybe he wasn't happy about that. But again, all the other people ended up coming back, like Hall and Nash and Hogan and everyone else, and Savage was a big enough name to where they could have easily brought him back in the mid-2000s, not to wrestle, but for like an appearance or put him in a fucking video game beyond All-Stars, which wasn't until 2011. They could have put him in the Hall of Fame around that point. They just never did. So they did put out a Macho Man DVD, I want to say, in 2008. I don't think he was ever involved in that, but yeah, unfortunately, he never made an appearance on WWE TV again before he passed in May of 2011. They actually talk about the car accident itself, how Lynn, his wife, was in the car with him when it happened. He suffered a heart attack while he was in the car before he crashed into a tree. She was the one who veered the car off of the highway to save other people's lives and crashed into the tree. He was probably going to pass away regardless. I don't think because he had the heart attack, like, oh, we could have survived had he not crashed. I think he was dead regardless. But she saved a lot of lives that day by doing that. So thankfully, she was in the car. Lanny ended up passing away in 2023. That's mentioned very briefly at the end of the book. And that was it. So the only two, I'm sure there's other things that were excluded from the book, and there's a lot included in the book. There is no mention of the TNA match when his last match actually was. But again, that shit was so bad, it's probably not really all that important. And it also, interestingly, was not mentioned that he ended up getting inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, again, posthumously, by Lanny in 2015. That was when Lanny was still around. He did it himself, and there was the rumor that Randy didn't want to go into the Hall of Fame unless it was the entire Poffo family. Thankfully, they just inducted Randy anyway, or Lanny at least agreed to it, whatever. But again, the WWE Hall of Fame isn't like the be-all, end-all, but I just thought it was interesting there was no mention of him eventually entering the WWE Hall of Fame, and WWE has really, embraced the Savage, legacy in the last 10 years since he's passed with merchandise and video games, stuff like that. Better than nothing. So would have been nice to have it had it happened when he was still around. But again, like I said, better than nothing. And everything else is pretty much covered, like I said. They do make mention of Elizabeth passing away in 2003 and that being really hard for Randy to really kind of get over. The tragic death that she suffered when she was with Lex Luger. And they don't really get into the details of what happened there, just that she died tragically in 2003, way too young. But yeah, that was the book, a really loaded book. Overall, I thought it was a great read, a great listen. Like I said, I checked out the audiobook version. Whoever did it did a fantastic job, but I think John did a excellent job with this book regardless in terms of the writing style. You really kind of get Randy Savage's personality in the book itself. And I think the fact that he spoke to Lanny and the entire family for this book, or at least whoever he could, and getting various interviews and doing his research, made for an excellent read. So I would well recommend it. I did see it on Spotify available for, like, if you have Spotify Premium, you can listen to it with, like, the listening hours or whatever the fuck that is. The audiobook version is available. I would recommend it, but honestly, John's writing is so strong. I would also recommend the actual book itself, or you can find it on Amazon or whatever. Once again, it's called, let me get the title here, Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Only just from last year, so it's a newer book. Well worth the read. Very much enjoyed it. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, and check out all the other book reviews I've done here on the channel, including some of the more recent ones from the Ronda Rousey book about a year ago, Becky Lynch's book I did a few months ago. I did the NWO book a few weeks ago, Jim Ross's book as well. And this one, and I think my next wrestling book review should be on Diamond Dallas Page in the book that he put out, I think back in 2019. It's been in the last couple of years, and I've been listening to the audiobook. I had like a free Audible book available, chose that one, and it's a great read, or a great listen, and I'll talk about that in my next book review here on the channel. So until next time, guys, thank you so much for checking out videos like this right here on the channel. More information on how to get videos like this early and ad-free by becoming a channel member here on the WrestleRant channel. But until next time, guys, I'm Graham Giason Matthews, and I'll catch you guys down the road.